Good morning. This is Dr. Keith Rose and Knives in the Box. Why do I say Knives is in the Box? Well, I'm at my office / studio this morning, and in the box, meaning my computer, is my producer Knives. And Knives, let's do a little sound check. Can everybody hear Knives?
Hey everybody, good morning. How you doing?
Good. Knives and I can hear you, Knives. So, man, I hope they can. Otherwise, they're going to say, "Can everyone hear Knives?" And you're going to hear this dead air. You never want dead air. Today is July 5th. Obviously, yesterday was July 4th, which is our Independence Day. And I love our Independence Day. That is one of my favorite holidays because I believe we celebrate Independence Day for probably the greatest breakup letter ever. And that is the Declaration of Independence. That's where 56 men decided, you know what, I'm going to sign a letter and break up with the biggest nation on the planet as far as strength. Not the biggest in size, but the most powerful nation on the planet. And when they did that, when they broke up with that nation, was everything going to go great for them? Was it risk adverse? I mean, did they do that knowing, hey, our future is set for the rest of our lives? No. I can only imagine what was going through their mind when they're signing that document. You see, when they signed that document, they had to realize that at best, if they won the war, they would have to build a new nation from scratch. So the work ahead of them after they actually fought the Revolutionary War was going to be just gigantic. They also probably thought at the worst, they lose to the Brits and they're all going to be hung for treason. So it means a lot to me that those guys signed the Declaration of Independence because in my mind, they are heroes. You know, they started it and realized something. We're a nation that produces heroes. But we don't talk about it too much. We talk about George Washington, and all anyone wants to say is he was a slave owner. Are you kidding me? George Washington is a hero crossing the Delaware. You know that story? Surprising the Hessians in Trenton. Do you know that before Washington did that, he was in the French Indian War? He had several horses shot out from underneath him. He was brave and inspiring. Denigrating heroes or failing to recognize them has a cynical and toxic effect on our younger generation. And I have a real passion for our younger generation because if we don't teach true history and allow liberals and progressives to foist this progressive history on us, we're going to lose the freedoms that these guys fought for over 240 years ago. There are other heroes out there. Nathan Hale, a devout Christian. He was a hero remembered by the Continental Army, not for his own sake, but for theirs, because he was noble and good. He stood without fear. He was the one that was caught. He was a spy. And he uttered those famous words before he was hung, "I regret I have but one life to give for my country." He knew it was going to be a country. He knew that they were fighting for something. And back in the day, we recognized heroes. In 1914, when the world was descending into the First World War, a magnificent statue of Hale was dedicated outside Connecticut Hall at Yale University. A copy of that statue sits in front of the Department of Justice today and has the inscription on it, "In the performance of his duty, he resigned his life a sacrifice to his country's liberty at New York." Let that sink in for a second. They put the statue, just for a little historical perspective, in front of Yale in 1914 because we were going off to fight the First World War and young men were enlisting and going. And they wanted them to see that statue when they walked out of the male dormitory. They knew those men were going over to fight. Several of them, most of them, would not come back. But at the same time, they needed to see something, to look up to something, to be inspired by something. That same statue to inspire folks for duty beyond yourself is in front of the Department of Justice. The same Department of Justice that is embroiled in one of the biggest scandals of my lifetime. We cannot forget history and experience, and we cannot forget our heroes. Decades later, Washington and Hale, both noble and virtuous figures, have been relegated to the recycle bin of history instead of understanding and studying what drove these men to such great acts of heroism and bravery. These acts and countless others performed by our founding fathers project the idea of greatness that is the fabric of our nation and essential to a free society. This means a lot to me, freedom. And if you don't pay attention to what's going on around you and understand how we got here, you won't keep it. And so today's show, we're going to talk about some great men of the past and some great men of the future. We're going to point out a few chuckleheads of the future, but what I want you to know is what they did in the past was inspiring and we can learn from it. Because we aren't going to go to the dustbin of history. Not on my watch. At least not with me. We have to build the bricks back up in this country with bravery, with selflessness, with sacrifice, with understanding history and experience to make our nation great again. Men like Hale and Washington were great men. The heroes of our founding are great men. And that's how we became great. The heroes of our founding and the development during our first 200 years of our nation is a large part of what inspires citizens to behave with virtue and reach for the stars. It wasn't the coddling of our young citizens' feelings, protecting them from the very challenges that forges character, that built this nation. No, it was the true accounts of unflinching bravery and heroic deeds by virtuous men of faith that gave the following generations an example. A template, if you will, to inspire future Americans to overcome obstacles, tear down barriers, and fight against evil. There is evil in this world, and it was men of faith early in the founding that fought against it. The challenges of a horrific civil war, 2 world wars, and multiple world conflicts did not tear the fabric of our nation or reduce us to a third world remnant. It was men and women of character and virtue, flawed, yeah, but with an overriding sense of good and evil that propelled this nation through its greatest heights and its darkest moments. There is no denying our heritage, and I'm going to talk about it today. Those that attempt to rewrite it or sweep it under the rug of revisionist history threaten the very goodness, and then I was thinking about that word now, the very greatness that is the United States of America. American heroes and their deeds have inspired countless people to greatness, replenishing the ranks of great Americans that inspire the next generation. You can just look back at our most recent conflicts, Afghanistan, Iraq. There are heroes out there that have inspired our nation. Today, our way of life in America is under attack, not from mighty warships or large standing armies, not from dictators. They're out there, but they're not attacking us directly, or Islamic terrorists. Although they do attack us, that's not threatening our nation as a whole. No, our nation is under attack from the idea that America is not good, nor is she great. This insidious heresy is easily refuted by history and experience, and we're going to talk about some of that today. I travel a lot, and by traveling coast to coast and talking to hardworking people that make up this country, I have seen that we are still a great nation and people understand America is great. While truth is self-evident, there are those in the media and in both parties that have decided that there is no more nobility and justice in being great. And I want you to remember that because I'm going to speak directly to that with George Washington's own words later. Their answer is to sow fear into our nation's fabric, to create dissent in the communities with disorganization under the guise of community organization. The heroes that represent bravery, commitment, and unwavering faith are being hidden in the pages of history. We no longer erect statues of men who have performed deeds so great they can only be explained by divine inspiration. The threat to this nation is a generation of Americans that do not understand that they are all created equal and can reach any height, conquer any task without the help or hindrance of government. We're at a crossroads. But I believe this is only a waypoint and not an endpoint. This is a time for remembering and continuing. Every time around the 4th of July, I revisit a lot of history, true American history. And I talked to my children. I sat them on the back porch last night as we watched fireworks, and I told them stories. We have to remember and we have to continue the legacy that our founders left us. This is a time to remember those great men and women of our nation who performed selfless, heroic deeds and birthed the greatest nation in the world. To remember America is great because America is good. I first read about that reading Democracy in America by Alexander de Tocqueville. He came over here, he's a French historian, he came over here and he wanted to understand how after our revolution we didn't whack everyone's head off. I'm kind of paraphrasing all this, but after the French Revolution, it descended into the Reign of Terror. And, it was horrific. They still continued to fight. People died. But after our revolution, we became a country. We pulled together. We weren't torn apart. So he wanted to understand it. And de Tocqueville came over here and he looked around and he said, America is great because America is good. They have laws that tell them what they can do, and they have morals that tell them what they can't. More on that later. This is also a time for continuing the tradition of freedom and remember America and innovation. Because freedom and innovation is what makes us great. And you can't have one without the other. To accomplish this continuing, I will work for the people who elected me, is what our president is currently saying. We have a president right now saying, I'm going to continue on with what I believe because the people elected me to do this. You see, our president believes in freedom and innovation. And when we look at him now, we call him an outside-the-box guy. Besides being a surgeon, I'm also a businessman. I own several companies. I'm what you call, a serial entrepreneur. And in business over the past 25 years, I believe I've learned a lot, and all the lessons I've learned have come from epic failures. We have a president who is a businessman and a builder, and someone that has built massive structures. He is someone that has achieved great heights and also has had massive failures. But you know what I see? I don't see a man with massive failures. I see a man that has learned from his past and continues to improve because he loves this nation, he cares about it, and he wants people to understand America is great. We don't have to sow fear into our fabric of this country like the Democrats and the liberals want us to. Our president's coming in and saying, you know what, I'm going to get on that loom and I'm going to knock fear right out of that fabric and we're going to restore greatness to this country. Nothing in this world can conquer the fabric of our nation. It's only from within that we can erode and someday crumble. I believe by studying and understanding the greatness of our founding and the selfless motivation of true heroes, we will put our republic back on the course of freedom. It was the unflinching faith preached early by George Whitefield prior to the founding that brought a diverse and rugged people together. It was the message that we are all created equal that laid the foundation for freedom and perpetual light on a shining hill for all the world to see. That is our country. We have the same unflinching faith in the American people I do right now. And I believe we will continue to be a beacon for freedom. One of the ways we can do that is to remember our founding and to remember our heroes. We recently had a big kerfluffle in the media, and I think appropriately so, because Nike decided we're going to pull the Betsy Ross flag off our shoes. And they did it reportedly because Colin Kaepernick complained. He began to whine. He thought, my gosh, that symbol represents slavery. That symbol doesn't represent freedom. I have a message for Mr. Kaepernick. Sir, why don't you use the money that you have made in your lifetime to educate yourself. I'm not calling you ignorant, but I am telling you you are ignorant of our founding. You know, if I was Colin Kaepernick, I'm going to put myself in his place. And the other day I talked a little bit about everything that happens in life can be used as an example. You can use it for good or you can use it for bad. You can use it to just use that person as a foil, which sometimes we have to because there's not a whole lot of redeeming value and a lot of things the liberal progressives do. But when Colin Kaepernick did this and Nike canceled the shoes, I was thinking to myself, are you kidding me? If I was Colin Kaepernick, if I really wanted to kind of like make a name for myself, I would actually talk about true heroes. This example that Colin Kaepernick decided to use, instead of saying the flag is bad, Nike pull it, and putting pressure on them and causing this major kerfuffle, he could have used this to say, you know, that flag represents freedom, but you know how we got that flag? Do you know how we got the freedom in the American colonies? It was because of a slave by the name of James Armistead. I believe that's how you pronounce it, Armistead. And Mr. Armistead was born a slave in Virginia. And when the Revolutionary War broke out, he actually went to his owner and asked him, he wanted to go fight for the colonies. Now, this is a slave. And let me just say in full disclosure, I'm not supporting slavery, but what I am doing is telling you about history. So this slave went to fight for the Continental Army. And he went and he ended up working for General Lafayette, who was a French general. Now, this general was a massive anti-slavery, big equality guy. And he really liked James Armistead. And so he worked for this general, and this general was very close to General Washington. And early on in the Revolutionary War, we weren't doing too well. I mean, we were literally up against the greatest fighting force in the world, and we weren't winning a lot of battles. And New York at the time was divided into, and I'm going to use 100,000-foot view here. I don't want to get too complicated. Sections of New York were British. Sections of New York were for the colonists. So anyway, James Armistead's working for General Lafayette, and he hears Lafayette and Washington talking, as the story goes, about how they really need to understand what's going on with the British because they can't get ahead of them. You see, intelligence, and we've talked about this before, is important. And something that our actual intelligence agencies have really gotten away from. Human intelligence is vital. So Armistead goes to Lafayette and says, I'll go over to the English and tell them I don't want to be with the colonies because they support slavery, and then I'll find out what they're doing, and I'll report back to you. And as the story goes, Lafayette says, it's really dangerous, and Armistead, this is what I want to do. So Armistead goes over to the British and tells them, hey, these colonists are a bunch of slave owners. I don't want to be there, so I'm going to come to you guys, and I want to work for you. And I believe, again, this is divine hand stuff. That means I think God had his hand on our nation. And Armistead ends up working for Lord Cornwallis, the head general for the British Army. And there was another general that was working with the British Army at the time. His name was Benedict Arnold and that's a whole nother story. When he was found to be a traitor, he had to jump to the Brits real quick. So he was actually working against the colonists and killing the soldiers that he swore to take care of. So he's now over at the British. You have Cornwallis and Benedict Arnold talking. And so you have right there a spy in their midst passing information back to the colonists that are fighting the Revolutionary War, George Washington and General Lafayette, the leaders. And I encourage you to go out and look up this story because it is fascinating and it's true history. But it gets even better. The colonists, the Revolutionary Army, the colonist army the colonial army starts beating the Brits. They start beating them a lot. In fact, so much that now there's a conversation between Cornwallis and his generals going, we're kind of getting stroked here. We need to know what's going on back on the colonial side. And as history talks about, Cornwallis knew there was a spy in their camp, and they didn't know who they could trust, but Cornwallis knew he could trust one person, and that was his trusty aide, James Armistead. And he said, James, I need you to go back to the colonials, rejoin their army, tell them you made a grave mistake, and then tell us what they're doing. So he goes back to General Lafayette, who he was working for and has been working for in the first place, and becomes the first double agent in the history of our country. Let me tell you how important this African American gentleman is. He passed off the information that allowed the colonial army to defeat the Brits at Yorktown. His information was vital. It was critical. So you have a gentleman who was a slave, but instead of feeling like a victim and embracing his victimhood, he chose a side. I believe he chose that side. I really believe this. I always like to wonder why people do things. So I don't know this from any readings, but I've read about Mr. Armistead's life. I think he saw goodness in the colonists. He didn't like slavery, but he saw men who wanted virtue, who believed in God, who believed in freedom. And I'd like to think that he thought past himself, and based on his actions, I can guarantee you he saw past himself to his children and grandchildren, wanting them to be free. So after the colonists won, and we were starting our new country, you know what happened? I'd love to tell you that James Armistead was freed. No, he wasn't. He went back to his slave owner in Virginia. Now, General Lafayette was a hero. This guy was getting all the accolades. This guy was a legitimate rock star back then. When he found out James Armistead was back at his original position, he wrote a long letter and a commendation of him and all the work he had done. That is a white man writing a long letter for an African-American slave, commending him for his great work because he believed he should be free. And you know what? That letter, I believe, and historians believe, led to this man was freed. He became a free man. He was a freed slave. He was also given a pension from the Continental Army until his death. Immediate reparations for his service to his country. Now, Mr. Kaepernick, I think that is a great story to tell. You could have tied that to the Nike shoe. Maybe they would have had a James Armistead shoe. I don't know. But I do know he was a great American and one of, I believe we can count him as one of our founding fathers. Because he put his life, his fortunes, as limited as they were, and his sacred honor on the line to birth a new nation. Historians don't like to talk about this. But I do. I told my children this story last night, and I can tell you not an eye blinked during this entire story. We owe a debt of gratitude to this man and his family. And I'm sure he may have relatives still today. You can look up this gentleman, but he is a famous man. And you know what he is? He's a hero. He's a hero of the Revolutionary War. So instead of Nike pulling those shoes, and let me explain something to you. When Nike pulled those shoes, you know the Betsy Ross flag? You know what that is, Nike? You're real big on branding. That's our brand. And James Armistead rode for the brand. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, we have heroes all throughout history that ride for that brand and have died for that brand. You have a swoosh. That may be the sound of your stock someday if you continue to ignore history and experience. Mr. Kaepernick, you need to understand that you have a man who is part of history and is a true hero that you could have brought attention to instead of bringing more attention to yourself. And that's why history and experience matters. You know, when I was looking this up and thinking more about history, I remembered something that my father and my grandfather had taught me when I was younger, and they used to always talk about George Washington's farewell letter. Something we don't hear a lot about anymore. In fact, it's something we don't hear anything at all about. So, being the history goofball that I am, I went back and looked it up and started reading it again. I had to remember reading it a long time ago, and I remembered that it was important, but that's pretty much all I remembered. But when I was reading about James Armistead and, Washington and Lafayette, I was intrigued. And as an aside, several years after the war, I believe 10, 20 years, General Lafayette visited America again. Now America's a nation. And when he came here, he was greeted as a hero. There were parades given for this man. And as the story goes, at one parade, he's going down in this parade, and James Armistead was there, just clapping with all the other people, waving at the conquering hero. And when Lafayette saw Armistead, he got off his horse and he ran and embraced him because he recognized one hero to another. You see guys that have been in the military together, if you ever see them greet each other, you'll never see them step and just shake hands. They always embrace. That's what heroes do. That's what brothers do. Colin Kaepernick, you could talk about the embrace of Lafayette and Armistead as being one of the earlier signs that slavery was temporary, freedom is eternal. So I looked at, again, the history of the founding documents, and I found this letter, this final farewell letter from George Washington. And I'm not going to read the whole thing because it would be long and you would probably glaze over at certain parts, but I'll tell you something. This letter is fascinating, and it hits on a lot of really key things. I'm just going to read a few paragraphs from it, but when I'm reading it, I want you to think about it, because Washington was a humble man. He was a pious man. He was definitely he believed in God. I know we like to talk about him and Jefferson as deists, but if you dig into history, you're going to find out that it's not quite everything you think it is. So Washington, in his letter, and I'm just going to pull out the important parts because I thought this was interesting. This is his farewell letter. Now, this letter used to be read. It was read before the Civil War. Lincoln had it read to the troops. It used to be read every year, and I think it still may be read in some places. But a lot of the liberals, progressives, revisionist history folks don't want to read this letter. They don't think it's cool. Guess why? Because it's patriotic. Washington talks about religion and morality are indispensable supports. He's talking about our nation. In vain would that man claim the tributes of patriotism who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness, these firmest props of the duties of men and citizens. The mere politician, equally with the pious man, ought to respect and to cherish them. A volume could not trace all their connections with private and public felicity. Let it simply be asked, where is the security for property, for reputation, for life, if the sense of religious obligation deserts the oath? Which are the instruments of investigation in courts, which are the instruments of investigations in courts of justice. And let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Whatever may be conceded to influence or refine education on minds of particular structure, reason and experience both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principle. It is substantially true that virtue or morality is a necessary spring of popular government. The rule, indeed, extends with more or less force to every species of free government. Who that is sincere friend to it can look with indifference upon the attempts to shake the foundation of the fabric. What Washington is saying here is that freedom and morality and religion, they're all important principles to govern by, and religion was the reason that we had morality and freedom. He said the state can't establish that, and it's not going to work. He doubted it very much. Now, whatever you believe, he didn't state what type of religion, although these folks were mostly Protestants, but he didn't state, you Baptist, Catholic, whatever. No, he said religion. What he was talking about is the golden rule. Believe in something greater than yourself. He went on to say there should be no establishment of state without religion, morality, and knowledge. Because knowledge is history and experience. And you can't establish this unless you have these things. Again, all we have to do is look back to understand what's going on today. You have the Democratic Party taking God out of their platform. They want the separation of church and state, and that's a whole nother show. But if you look at the founding, we have really bastardized that statement. Washington goes on in his letter, and I know this is written a long time ago. It was first published on September 19th, 1796 in the Philadelphia Daily American Advisor. I guess that was when they had real newspapers. But when it was published, this is how they spoke, so I'm going to try to translate the best I can. But he says, not unconscious in the outset of the inferiority of my qualifications, experience in my own eyes, perhaps still more in the eyes of others, has strengthened the motives to diffidence of myself. And every day the increasing weight of years admonishes me more and more that the shade of retirement is as necessary to me as it will be welcome. Satisfied that in any circumstance have given particular value to my service, they were temporary. I have the consolation to believe that while choice and prudence invite me to quit the political scene, patriotism does not forbid it. What Washington is saying here is that he's leaving politics. He's extremely humble, saying, if I did anything, it's only temporary. This is one of the biggest founding fathers we have. This is our first president. They wanted to actually make him a king. He said, are you kidding me? That's not what we fought this Revolutionary War for. You have a man of faith, a man that is humble. And he's saying he can quit the political scene, but patriotism continues. That doesn't forbid him from quitting. Patriotism is actually he needs to let others come in and move on. You could almost use this for term limits. Washington served his 2 terms. He's saying, actually, to be a patriot, I recognize that I'm getting along in years. He actually admits that he's getting older. He's saying he's a patriot, but he's allowing someone else to come in. He's moving on. I pulled out one more, and I just thought, gosh, this is just so fascinating. If it's not fascinating to you, I'm sorry, but I just think this is the coolest thing ever. He goes on to say, these will be offered to you with the more freedom, as you can only see in them the disinterested warnings of a parting friend who can possibly have no personal motive to bias his counsel. He's saying, hey, look, I'm just telling you this. I have no agenda. I'm a friend that's leaving. But this is my counsel, and it's not biased. It's not based on Democrat. It's not based on Republican. It's not based on ideology. It's based on my patriotism. Nor can I forget, as an encouragement to it, your indulgent reception of my sentiments on a former and not dissimilar occasion. Interwoven as the love of liberty, this is what Washington writing, and I love it, with every ligament of your hearts, no recommendation of mine is necessary to fortify or confirm the attachment. Meaning, nothing he can say is going to make you love liberty. It is part of your DNA. The unity of government which constitutes you one people is now dear to you. It is justly so, for it is the main pillar in the edifice of your real independence. The support for your tranquility at home, your peace abroad, of your safety, of your prosperity, of that very liberty which you so highly prize. But as it is easy to foresee that from different causes and from different quarters, much pains will be taken, many artifices employed to weaken in your minds the conviction of this truth. as this is the point of your political fortress against which the batteries of internal and external enemies will be most constantly and actively, though often covertly and insidiously, directed. It is of infinite moment that you should properly estimate the immense value of your national union to your collective and individual happiness, that you should cherish a cordial, habitual, and immovable attachment to it, accustoming yourselves to think and speak of it as the palladium of your political safety and prosperity, watching for its preservation with jealous anxiety, discounting whatever may suggest for even a suspicion that it can in any event be abandoned, and indignantly frowning upon the first dawning of every attempt to alienate any portion of our country from the rest, or to enfeeble the sacred ties which now link together the various parts. For this you have every inducement of sympathy and interest. Citizens, by birth or choice of a common country, that country has a right to concentrate your affections. The name American, which belongs to you in your national capacity, must always exalt the just pride of patriotism more than any appellation derived from local discriminations. With slight shades of difference, you have the same religion, manners, habits, and political principles. You have in common cause fought and triumphed together. The independence and liberty you possess are the work of joint councils, joint efforts, of common dangers, sufferings, and successes. But these considerations, however powerful they address themselves to your sensibility, are greatly outweighed by those which aptly more immediately to your interest. Here, every portion of our country finds the most commanding motives for carefully guarding and preserving the union of the whole. What George Washington is saying here is that you fought and you sustained a country, but don't let your guard down. You're going to have enemies from without and from within, openly and covertly attack you. Are we seeing that today? Are we seeing a cold civil war that we talked about yesterday? I believe we are. But I thank God that we have the founding, stories of heroes, documents and letters that have been left to us to show us the founding principles were not just some kind of words on parchment, but were actually founding, immovable, immutable words that will carry our nation through their most turbulent times. The only way we fail is if we don't go back and study them, read them, apply them, and recognize faith, virtue, freedom are the pillars that made this nation great. We're talking a lot about heroes today. We tied that back to what I talked about yesterday when we're in a cold civil war. But I think to win this cold civil war, and I am not talking about a kinetic fight. No, I'll leave that to the liberals and the progressives that like to attack good ideas with bleach, 7-Eleven knives, girls, boys that should be girls, dressed up in little black outfits, screaming and yelling like banshees because they can't accept truth. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about this cold civil war is going to be won by understanding what's going on. I read a little bit last segment about George Washington's farewell letter, and he identified these threats. He identified these threats over 200 years ago. Because if you don't know what you're up against, you're going to be in a world of hurt. So we're going to work on understanding what we're up against this liberal ideology. This is no longer the Democrat Party of JFK. I mean, he would not even he would be a Republican today. And that's good and that's bad because our Republicans need to grow some more spines. But You got to understand that the Democrat Party needs to be called out for what they are. And I think we're going to call them the Democrat/fascist Party of America. Now, you hear Antifa, the anti-fascist. No, they're just really the anti-constitutional, the anti-intelligence, the ass hattery of the Democratic Party. But we're going to call them out. But now the Democrats don't want to be called fascists, and they've introduced this new soft word because that's what Democrats do. They don't hit you in the front. Remember I talked to you about any Democrat bill, anything that's done, the Obamacare, the Health and Portability Act has been anything but health and anything but portable. More people have lost their insurance than had it. Deductibles are so high, people don't even feel like they have insurance because they can't even afford to go to the doctor. But that was the design of it. But the Democrats don't come out and tell you that. They like to code it in words. Remember, their goal is a benevolent tyranny. Benevolent meaning whatever they think will be good for you. Tyranny is the ultimate outcome. They've introduced the word democratic socialist as a soft word for what socialist really is. You see, a socialist is a communist without an AK-47. The Democratic Party no longer believes in, supports, or will live by the Constitution of the United States. Now, I just read to you from George Washington's letter. We just had the 4th of July. I live in South Texas. I went out to the beach yesterday and got to do a little surfing, and it was awesome. And in Texas, you can actually drive on the beaches, and it's really nice. And it's clean. Imagine that. People drive on the beaches. There's no trash. People love our beaches down here in South Texas. And when I came in from surfing, as far as I could see, there was nothing but cars, pickup trucks, campers with American flags. Now, this is a heavy Democrat area I live in down here. Highly Hispanic, which is great. My wife is from Mexico. But I'm telling you, people down here are patriots. People down here are free market capitalists. People down here want and believe in freedom. A lot of them just don't know the history of how we got here, and that's our job to teach them. So, the Democrat Party no longer believes in it. They no longer support it, and they outright say they're no longer going to live by the Constitution of the United States. The constitutional document and construct that has seen us through some of the worst, horrific, challenging events over these past 243 years have been discarded in the dustbin of the Democrat history books. This brilliantly crafted document, our Constitution, has guided us through so many manners and challenges that has given us what we have as our perfect union. The U.S. has evolved and self-corrected many shortfalls and imperfections over the arc of our history. We've had them. We've had shortfalls. We had slavery. And then we have corrections. We had the Korematsu decision with Japanese internment camps, and we had corrections. These corrections were not because we are just good and wonderful people. These corrections are because we had faith, virtue, people believed in God, and we had a constitution to guide us. We had guiding principles that we held dear. The average constitution in the history of the world only lasts 17 years. Ours is 230 years running. And I say we keep it running, just not with a Nike swoosh. What the Democrat Party has been to our President Trump, the 45th President of the United States, is their second foray into the world of sedition and treason. The first time the Democrat Party tipped the nation over, which is exactly what they're trying to do now. Don't kid yourself. They're all on the edge of this country trying to push it over. They first did it against the 16th president of the United States. Look at history. The Democrat Party, operating as the Confederacy, murdered the 16th president. They murdered Andrew Johnson, the vice president, and attempted to murder Secretary of State William Seward with a knife attack in his home. The Democrats refused to accept the results of the 1864 election at that time and overthrow the president and his team, impacting the legal succession plan. The rolling coup d'état continues to this day. 2.5 years into the first term of our 45th president, an attempt to remove him and prevent him from governing continues at full speed. The Democrat fascists will not stop, and they will not quit. That's why we can't stop, we can't quit, and we have to educate. They must be destroyed, not physically, but their message needs to be crushed with truth, with history, and with experience. In 1864, it was this relentless pursuit of their agenda that brought the nation to the brink of exhaustion and a permanent fracture into two parts. They created the conditions that brought together General Grant, General Sherman, and President Lincoln, and eventually the successful conclusion of the Civil War. The president raised the need to end the war and reunite the country. Together, Lincoln said, we must end this. The solution was the Savannah Campaign, the near total destruction of the South's structure and ability to wage war. Sherman's famous quote captures where we find ourselves today. These people have chosen war. We must spoon feed it to them until they can take no more. Now, I'm not saying we need to spoon feed violence to them. Not at all. The war that they're employing right now is a cold civil war. But we need to take it to them and spoon feed them truth and experience until they can take it no more. We need to use their bad examples as good examples as what not to do. The Democrat Party has resorted to violence in the pursuit of their goals right now to destroy our president. These actions demand a response, not a violent response. When viewed from an objective optic, the relentless effort to destroy our 45th president has accomplished nothing of substance to support any accusations against this president. Yet, the resistance continues, and violence as a political tool has already begun. So we need to educate folks on this violence. When they're breaking the law, they need to go to jail. We need to enforce the rule of law is what keeps this nation safe, and it's what keeps us a nation with rule of law. The weaponization of the political process, today's Democrat Party, has many historical cousins. The Ba'ath Party being the most recent tyrannical party, that was Iraq. A party guided by a team executing political warfare on political enemies using the Soviet active measures technique to destroy political opponents in the media, using propaganda, deception, covert influence, and the use of the country's legal system as a political influence tool. This is really familiar. Brennan, a CIA director, along with Comey, FBI director, have employed the national security weapons of the NSA, intelligence apparatus, and law enforcement community against a person that the Democrat Party finds grotesque. You know why the Democrat Party finds President Trump grotesque? Because he was elected by the people and not appointed by the elites. All the money they threw at him in the campaign, putting up her thighness to run against him, Hillary Clinton, getting the FBI, the CIA to cause a Spygate to try to disrupt the duly elected president of the United States. And you know what? It didn't work. And so what do all these liberal elites and all these progressives resort to? He's gross. He's not fit. He shouldn't be there. Not only do they do it, their politicians do it as well. I mean, if you don't have anything positive to say, just attack. Throw words. And that's what they're doing right now. They don't feel like he's good enough. He's gross. Guess what? He's the president of the United States. Stock market's at an all-time high. Unemployment's at an all-time low. Our allies now trust us. Our enemies now fear us. We didn't have that under 8 years of Barack Obama. That's recent history. Pretty tough to rewrite right now. The Democrats have taken the nation over the cliff. The public trust has been ruptured, and without arrest, prosecution, and incarceration, I don't think that trust is going to be restored. I'm watching this play out in real time, and I'm seeing it, and that's why I'm behind this microphone today. Now, you heard George Washington's farewell letter. You heard him say that we were going to be attacked. I just talked to you about how the Democrats, or the Democrat socialists, are attacking and yelling at our president. But don't take my word for it. Let's hear what one of the Democrat presidential wannabe candidates says about our president, and who better to do that than Miss Kamala Harris. Cut one, go.
And so as a former prosecutor, I will share with you, I'm here to teach you and tell you about part of my background. I have a background where successfully I have prosecuted the big banks who preyed on homeowners, prosecuted pharmaceutical companies who preyed on seniors, prosecuted transnational criminal organizations that preyed on women.
Stop. Just for a second. She's speaking at a political event, a fundraising event, and she's talking about how she's prosecuted. Listen to the pressured speech she has. Listen to the forced speech. She can't wait to hit that crescendo to get to where she's trying to go with this. She's talking about how she was a prosecutor. I mean, we can look at your record, but she's prosecuted people. She wants you to know that. And there's a reason. Continue.
Children. And I will tell you, we have a predator living in the White House.
Stop. She talked to you about being a prosecutor. She's in front of a group of folks that are all there because they want to support her. And she's now going to say that our president, just what we talked about just now, how they're attacking our president, is a predator in the White House. Now, there is no proof of this. In fact, I know what a predator is. I live in South Texas. I've seen predators. We actually hunt predators down here. Those are the animals that eat things and prey on weaker animals. A human predator might be a powerful politician that would prey on a young, up-and-coming lawyer, Willie Brown, Kamala Harris, but that wouldn't be a predatory thing. And because that young, up-and-coming lawyer, Miss Harris, did you prey on Willie Brown just to get ahead? Or was it just love? Now, I've seen Willie Brown, and I'm not saying you have to be good looking to love someone, but you're a more attractive young lady, and he's kind of a not that good looking older dude. So one of you guys was preying on the other. You both predators at the same time. So you should know about predators, but what you don't know about is our president. What you don't talk about is his record. What you don't talk about are his legislative initiatives. What you talk about are merely platitudes and throwing out adjectives that will fire up your base. Whatever that means. Continue.
And the thing about this person is he's got predatory instincts and a predatory nature. Because let me tell you a secret about predators. They prey on the vulnerable. They prey on those who they assume are weak. They prey on those who they assume are desperate. And the thing about predators is this: they're cowards.
Stop. I love that. What Miss Kamala Harris just described is the Democrat Party, not the President of the United States. We have record low unemployment in every disadvantaged community in the United States of America. Record low unemployment, which means people are working. Everyone is making more money. Wealthy people, I don't even know what that means, but people that make over X and people that make under X. He's lifted everybody. But you know who preys on the weak, the disadvantaged, the uninformed? That's the Democrat Party, because they want to create victims. Now, you heard me read from George Washington's farewell letter. He was very humbly, if I did anything, it was just merely temporary for this country. You talk about a true hero who has done great things, who is very humble. And then you have some lady bragging about the fact that she's prosecuted this and prosecuted that. And our president is preying on the weak and the vulnerable. I'm sorry, he just signed criminal justice reform. That's anything but preying on the weak and vulnerable. It was letting people out of prison. not putting them in there. No, you, Miss Harris, prey on the weak and the vulnerable with your words, with your lies, with your revisionist history. You're trying to tear the fabric of this nation that great men and women participated in to build it to the country it is today, to cull it, to continue to grow it. You are of Jamaican Indian ancestry, not African American by my understanding, and by a lot of other African Americans that have written articles against you that I've read. But you want to claim the victim. You want to claim the feelings because you can't vote for a Democrat unless you're a victim. And if they don't have enough votes, then they haven't created enough victims. You know, it doesn't stop with her. She's going to throw bombs left and right all the time, metaphoric. She's going to tell you we have a predator in the White House when we actually have a true president in the White House. We did have a predator in the White House one time. His name was William J. or Bill Jefferson Clinton, B.J. Clinton. He was a predator. He preyed on a young lady who was an intern. He preyed on lots of women. This is true. He preyed on so many people and lied that he lost his law license, and so did his wife. But that kind of history doesn't matter to you because you're not going to speak truth to power. You're going to speak your truth to get your power. But there are more chuckleheads on this clown bus. I was coming across something, and then I'm wondering, how are they going to attack this president again? How are they going to attack this administration? Well, we always know about Spygate, and there's no one better. I looked up this clip, but I don't watch it. I don't watch MSNBC because I don't think anyone watches it. I guarantee you Airport Radar gets more hits than this, but Chris Matthews had something to say with his guest. Cut to go.
Something about the subject.
Well, where's this all end up? Because I've been hearing about subpoenas and requests for documents and for testimony, and all that seems to be going on and on. We're halfway through the first year of congressional control of the House, and we're getting through the summer. And I'm wondering if you're going to be able to get the president's tax returns before the next election.
Stop. Okay. Classic fake news. Remember, I had the obituary a few episodes ago. Journalism's dead. He says, you guys are almost halfway through the term. Are you going to get his tax returns? What? I mean, Chris, you just shot spittle all over the screen. I get you have the only cameraman with an actual screen protector. You know, I'm a surgeon, and when you operate, a lot of times if there's going to be a lot of fluids flowing around, we wear masks with this little plastic visor to keep from getting sprayed on. I guarantee you everyone that works on his television show probably wears one of those masks with that spray thing. Because when he talks, his spittle just goes around like a big dog, shaking his jowls and slobbering everywhere. So as Spittle Boy barks out, he's got his guess. He's like, how are we going to get the president? Are you going to get his tax returns? Well, it's the same way you got Nancy Pelosi's tax returns, same way you got Barack Obama's tax returns, same way you get Chuck Schumer's tax returns. What are you talking about? Continue.
Do you wonder about that?
That's a really good question. I am worried about it, and it's going to be up to the courts to determine how quickly they will move on this. We hope they move very quickly.
Stop. And that, my friends, in a cold civil war is how you fight it in a constitutional republic. Well, we hope. I think that's a very good question, Chris. No, it's actually a moronic question, Chris. It's a good question for the very few people that want to try to make this president illegitimate. It's a good question for people that want to fight a cold civil war against the constitutional republic of the United States of America, the constitutional conservatives, the people that believe in the rule of law. That's a great question. And we believe it's up to the courts. You know, the courts, and you can go back and read the founding there, we have co-equal branches, but the liberals are so easy to understand. If they can't get it through the legislation, then they try to just backdoor it through the courts. If they can't legislate it, then they just try to make it a law or get a court ruling that at least can last long enough until it's got an appeal. That's why having President Trump here is so important, is to put constitutional conservatives on the Supreme Court, originalists that understand these founding documents. But that's what you get. You get the clown bus. You get the people attacking the president. You get Spittle Boy. Where are his tax returns? See, they got to attack the president. What happened to the Russian collusion, Chris? It's still out there. I mean, you guys are still trying to talk about it. We debunked it really hard, and there are a lot of other great guys out there debunking it at a cyclic rate that, is epic. But you're still going to have people talking, people complaining. But another thing that's wonderful about the Democrats is all these attacks eventually dissipate because the truth finally comes out. I told you last episode, truth resonates, slogans dissipate. Slogans or BS. I had to use the word slogan. I was trying to think of a better word. I could just say basically truth resonates, progressive talking points dissipate. Because I can remember the progressive talking point where we had a fake crisis, and then we had a crisis. Right now, we have a crisis on the border. And at first, none of the liberals wanted to understand it, but as we talked about yesterday, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she knows there's a crisis because she lied her little, I guess it's little, I haven't seen her, butt off, and was talking about how people were being forced to drink from toilets and the Border Patrol were just horrible people and not on good behavior. And basically, she's the designated bomb thrower. We talked about her. She's just going to say whatever they tell her to say because, and I'm a physician, I'm guessing she has 2 neurons, one's inhibitory. That's my best guess because she's just not the sharpest tool in the shed. As I like to say, she's just a tool. But I did find a little dose of, truth come out of a very strange place, and that was CNN by a guy that I don't have a lot of respect for, but I do respect the truth, so I'll point it out when it's spoken, and that's Fareed Zakaria. And old Fareed recognized something. Cut 3.
But first, here's my take. Given President Trump's mean-spirited and often bigoted attitudes on immigration, it pains me to say this, but he is right that the United States faces a crisis with its asylum system. Democrats might hope that the out-of-control situation at the southern border undermines Trump's image among his base as a tough guy who can tackle immigration, but they should be careful. It could actually work to the president's advantage.
Stop. Democrats need to be careful. This could work to the president's advantage. The out-of-control situation on the border. Of course, he has to start. I mean, he's a liberal. He's on CNN, so he has to start with the bigoted, racist. I mean, Democrats, you can always tell when they're talking about someone and they start with adjectives describing people. I do it as a foil when they actually show and act stupid. If I call someone an idiot, it's because the way you act is an idiot. The president is not a bigot. He's not a racist, and there's nothing to support that. No. But what are facts to the new modern day journalists? Facts are just merely things to be brushed away, kind of like a little lint on their $1,500 suits right before they go have martinis at their weekly let's get around and tell each other how great we are socials. But I do remember a time where the Democrats did say that there was no problem on the border. Now, you just heard CNN say there's a serious problem on the border. You heard yesterday Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tell us that the border is a crisis. And as Rahm Emanuel said, don't let any good crisis go to waste. But when the president pointed it out at first, our president, who stands for honor and integrity and is actually pointing out real problems in the United States of America, the Democrats went crazy and branded it a non-issue. Cut 4.
Here's my question. Are you convinced? Did his last-ditch effort to persuade Americans that there is a crisis at the southern border, did it work?
This is a manufactured crisis.
The multimedia
At the heart of this whole thing are a whole bunch of lies.
We have a president who will go on TV tonight and lie and lie and lie some more. This is a manufactured crisis.
Wouldn't we be there because it was a crisis? They were being overrun.
Yeah.
There's something manufactured about this.
Yeah.
There's no crisis. It's a manufactured crisis.
This is a manufactured crisis.
He's taking 800,000 federal employees hostage so he can get his vanity wall. So he's created this crisis. It's a manufactured crisis.
This whole mess is manufactured. It's a manufactured crisis. A non-crisis at the border that's really not fooling anybody.
Stop. So that's a montage of the media not too long ago talking about the, quote, manufactured crisis. They call their president a liar. They said this is all a joke. This is not a crisis at the border. This is manufactured. No, it wasn't a manufactured crisis. Now it's a crisis. Now they all recognize it. Half those people were on CNN CNN was just talking about how this is a crisis and could come back to bite them. You got to love liberals. Just when you think they're right, history and experience proves them wrong, sometimes much quicker than they're ready for. Thanks for spending some time with me this morning. Please get out the word. Talk about heroes. Talk about experience. Stay away from the manufactured news. And read things, read a lot, and figure out for yourself about truth, about justice, about freedom, about virtue. Talk to your kids. We're in a cold civil war, but I do believe we will win.